"Sweetheart, grab the glasses, will you?" The words hit like a slap disguised as a smile. A ripple of laughter followed, sharp and polished, bouncing off the marble floors of the Bellevue Grand. Ava Monroe didn't move. She stood by the champagne tower in a cream dress, elegant but understated. No sequins, no diamonds. Just quiet confidence. She lifted her phone to her ear, eyes steady on the woman who'd pointed at her. Behind the woman stood a wall of men in tuxedos, smirking like it was part of the entertainment. One of them even snapped his fingers. Ava's voice was calm. "Yes, it's happening. Cancel the merger." The laughter stuttered. No one had heard her words, but something in her tone, measured, final, rippled through the room. "Which catering service are you from?" One of the men called out, raising his flute. "You move quick. You might earn a tip." The woman beside him leaned closer, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. "Darling, this is for investors only." Music floated through the air, but it couldn't smooth the shift in the room. A photographer froze mid-shot. Near the stage, a young journalist lowered her drink and raised her phone camera instead. Ava's lips barely curved. She'd met this type before. Power without grace, manners without empathy. At 29, she'd been escorted out of a conference she was supposed to lead because someone didn't recognize her. At 35, she'd been mistaken for an assistant at her own firm's event. And tonight, the pattern repeated, but this time, she wasn't the one cornered. "Security," the tall man barked. A guard by the door hesitated, his eyes flicking between Ava and the group. The woman with the pearls stepped forward, snatching the event pass from Ava's wrist. The rip of paper sliced through the air like a threat. "You're holding up service," she snapped. "People are waiting." Ava didn't step back. She held her phone tighter. "Priority 1, she said softly. The young journalist, Grace Miller, zoomed in, recording the moment through a gap in the glasses. The little red dot blinked steady, capturing every breath, every sneer. A waiter paused beside them, his tray trembling slightly. He didn't speak, but the flicker in his eye said everything. He understood exactly what was happening. "Ma'am," the guard said slowly, unsure, "maybe we should." "Escort her out," the pearl-clad woman interrupted, her tone sharp. But Ava spoke before he could move. "You might want to wait." Her phone buzzed. A notification lit the screen. Then another. The guard's earpiece crackled. Across the room, a man in a dark suit turned pale, his phone lighting up with message after message. Every head began to turn. Grace's camera caught the shift, the arrogance draining from faces that had been laughing seconds ago. Ava lowered her phone. "You were right," she said quietly. "This event is for investors who matter." And in the cold shimmer of the chandelier, it was suddenly very clear who that was. That pause always came when authority met arrogance, and nobody knew which would break first. The security guard started forward, slow, uncertain. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your credentials." "They're gone," Ava Monroe said evenly, nodding toward the shredded event pass clutched in the woman's manicured hand. The woman, Evelyn Drake, the self-appointed queen of the Bellevue Grand, lifted her chin, her pearl necklace glinting like armor. Grace Miller's camera caught it all, the torn pass, the smug smirk, the moment Evelyn held the proof of her own pettiness. Evelyn's smile widened. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Ava lowered her phone just enough for her voice to carry. "You already chose hard." Then she raised it back to her ear. "Transfer all capital to Harlow. Don't wait for the board." The words hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. A ripple of whispers spread through the guests. "Did she say Harlow?" A man in a gray suit murmured to his wife. Her expression shifted from amusement to alarm. The tall man beside Evelyn, Charles Whitford, let out a sharp laugh. "What is this, some kind of act? You think we'll buy that bluff?" "No bluff," Ava said quietly. "Just business." Grace stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. For the record, she was invited. "I saw her name on the investor list this afternoon." Charles scoffed. "You must have misread it." "I didn't," Grace replied, lifting her phone higher, steady now. "And I'm not the only one who saw it." From behind the crowd, a young server with a tray of water spoke up, his voice cautious but clear. "She's telling the truth." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Evelyn's smirk flickered, just for a second, but Ava noticed. Everyone did. "Phase 2, Ava said softly into the phone. "Execute." The guard froze mid-step. He didn't know what Phase 2 was, but instinct told him it wasn't going to favor the ones who'd called him over. The music from the quartet floated on, delicate and detached, like it belonged to a different evening entirely. Evelyn took another step closer, perfume sharp, voice louder for the crowd to hear. People like you always find a way to sneak in where you don't belong. Ava didn't blink. Charles reached into his pocket, pulled out another guest pass, someone else's, and held it out mockingly. Here, he said, tearing it clean in half before letting the pieces flutter to the floor. Maybe this one fits the story you're selling. Gasps rose like wind through the room. Grace moved around the circle, capturing everything, every glance, every fracture in composure. Her pulse raced, but her hands stayed steady. She's stalling. Evelyn snapped to the guard. Remove her. On what grounds? Ava asked. Fraud, Charles shot back. She's impersonating an investor to interfere with a $900 million transaction. The number hit the room like a drumbeat. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone near the buffet whispered, "That's the size of the Whitford deal." Ava exhaled slowly, lowering her phone. Not anymore. Her gaze swept the group. Pull all funds from Whitford Holdings. Redirect to Harlow Group. Notify compliance immediately. A sharp choke came from the back, someone swallowing champagne the wrong way. Charles's laugh cracked halfway through. You can't redirect anything. You don't belong here. From the edge of the crowd, the young server spoke again, firmer this time. She's not bluffing. Nobody cancels a $900 million deal unless they own it. Evelyn spun toward him, voice slicing the air. Stay out of this, kid. Grace's voice rose before the boy could shrink back. You made it everyone's business the moment you tore up her pass. The guard stopped 2 steps from Ava, eyes darting between the accusers and the growing ring of onlookers. Silence thickened the air, ready to break. Ava didn't move. She didn't need to. Somewhere across the ballroom, phones began lighting up, alerts, notifications, news updates. The tide had turned, and when Evelyn finally realized it, it was already too late. Phones were raised now, their red record lights blinking across the ballroom like tiny beacons of defiance. Ava Monroe's voice stayed calm, steady, the sound of someone who had already made her decision. One last time, she said evenly, eyes fixed on Evelyn Drake. Are you certain you want me removed? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Absolutely. She nodded to the guard. Do it. The guard stepped forward, slow, reluctant, and that was when Ava moved. Not back, but forward, closing the distance between herself and the circle that had surrounded her since the first insult. The confidence in her movement was quiet, deliberate. Evelyn's perfect posture slipped for just a fraction of a second, and everyone saw it. Ava's voice didn't rise, but it carried. You just told the wrong woman she doesn't belong in the room she paid for. The tension broke like storm glass. The Bellevue Grand wasn't buzzing anymore. It was humming, alive with electric disbelief. Every whisper, every nervous glance became part of a pulse running through the crowd. Ava held her phone steady, her gaze never wavering. Proceed to Phase 3. A crisp female voice answered through the receiver, Rebecca Lang, Ava's chief of staff. Understood. Legal's on the line. Capital transfer is in motion. Charles Whitford gave a brittle laugh. Phase 3? What is this, some kind of performance? Ava's eyes flicked to him for the first time. Not a performance, she said. An audit. The words didn't explode, they landed. Heavy, unshakable. Around them, people shifted uneasily. Grace Miller, standing a few feet away, spoke clearly so everyone could hear. If she's bluffing, why do you look nervous? Her camera was angled perfectly, both Ava and the Whitfords framed in a single, damning shot. Evelyn snapped. Because this woman is trying to humiliate my family at a public event. No, Ava replied softly. I'm letting your actions speak louder than I ever could. The security guard hesitated again, hand half raised. He'd seen publicity stunts before, but this wasn't one of them. This was power shifting in real time. Near the champagne tower, the young server whispered to his colleague, "She's in control. Look at her. She hasn't moved an inch she didn't choose." Rebecca's voice returned in Ava's ear. Corporate has flagged the Whitford portfolio for breach of good faith. Shall I bring in Harlow Group's legal team? Yes, Ava said, her eyes sweeping the ballroom. Make it public. Charles tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked in his throat. Even if you had authority, No one cancels a $900 million deal mid-gala. That's not how business works. Ava tilted her head slightly. That's exactly how my business works. Evelyn stepped closer, her tone icy. Do you even know who you're speaking to? Yes, Ava said, her voice smooth, her smile faint but sharp. Do you? The question hit the room like a flare. Guests exchanged glances. Some were already connecting the dots. Grace took a slow, visible breath. I think, she said quietly, we're all about to find out. The guard froze in place, caught between an order he no longer trusted and a growing certainty that the woman he'd been told to remove might be the most powerful person in the room. Ava lowered her phone. Her voice was calm, but the edges were steel. You've called me a fraud. Tore my credentials. Tried to erase me from a deal I built from the ground up. And through all of it, I've stayed patient. She took one step forward, the distance between her and Evelyn shrinking to inches. Patience, she said softly, is over. Rebecca's voice came one last time through the phone. Press statement drafted. Legal confirmation received. You're clear to proceed. Ava met Evelyn's eyes, then Charles's. The pearls around Evelyn's neck shimmered beneath the chandelier's cold light. Good, Ava said. Let's finish this. The room seemed to hold its breath. The chandelier light tilted toward her like the whole place wanted a front row seat. Every phone lens was locked on Ava now. Even the quartet had stopped playing. Bows hovering above strings, frozen by the gravity of the moment. Ava stepped forward into the open space, facing the Whitford family head-on. The story they'd been writing for her was over. She was writing the next line herself. Ava Monroe's heels struck the marble floor like a metronome, counting down to something inevitable. Each click cut through the stunned silence that had swallowed the Bellevue Grand. You've spent the last 15 minutes treating me like I wandered in here by mistake, she began, voice steady, carrying easily across the room without a microphone. You accused me of fraud. You called security. You tore up my credentials in front of 200 witnesses. Charles Whitford folded his arms, forcing a smirk he didn't feel. Evelyn Drake's jaw was tight, her fingers wide around her clutch. And through all of it, Ava continued, none of you asked my name. That pause was a blade. The air thickened. Dozens of phones lifted higher, their red recording lights glowing like tiny verdicts. Grace Miller's lens caught every flicker of expression, the defiance in Ava's stance, the tension in the faces across from her. I'm Ava Monroe, she said finally, her tone cutting through the hush. CEO of Monroe Global. Architect of the deal you were celebrating tonight. The $900 million Whitford acquisition you've been so proud of. The crowd collectively inhaled. I built it, she went on. I funded it. And I just handed it to your competitor, the Harlow Group. The words hit like thunder breaking marble. Evelyn blinked. Charles's arms dropped, his smirk collapsing. Shock rolled through the room. Gasps, murmurs, a glass shattering somewhere near the back. Then, from the far edge of the ballroom, a single clap. Then another. Scattered applause built, uneven but growing, an undercurrent of approval rising from the witnesses who'd seen everything. You're bluffing, Charles said, voice cracking at the edges. Ava tilted her head. Check your phone. He hesitated, then fished it out. His eyes darted to the screen, and the color drained from his face. Evelyn followed, her manicured hand trembling slightly. Around them, notifications lit up one after another, small blue screens glowing like evidence. Breaking. Whitford Holdings loses $900 million contract. Harlow Group confirms acquisition. Grace's camera caught the exact moment Evelyn's posture broke, her shoulders sinking beneath the glare of the chandeliers. Charles turned away, but there was no corner of the ballroom that could hide him from the truth or the cameras. I didn't need to raise my voice, Ava said into the stunned quiet. I didn't need to call the press. You did that for me. Her gaze swept across the group that had mocked her minutes ago. All I had to do was let you be seen. The security guard, still standing a few feet away, shifted his stance and lowered his hand from his earpiece. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but firm. Ma'am, my apologies. Ava's eyes softened just enough to acknowledge him. Respect returned for respect shown, then turned back to Evelyn and Charles. At the edge of the room, the young server whispered to his coworker, she owns the room now. His tone carried, and no one disagreed. The ballroom had transformed, tension giving way to something rawer. Conversations fractured mid-sentence. Champagne flutes were set down too quickly, the crystal clinking like alarm bells. Charles's face flushed crimson. "We can fix this," he muttered to Evelyn. "No," she hissed, eyes darting toward the exit as though escape were still possible. But every camera lens followed her. Grace zoomed in, catching the pearls at Evelyn's throat trembling as she swallowed. A man in a navy suit, one of the Whitford family's advisors, stepped forward. "Ms. Monroe," he stammered. This isn't necessary. We can renegotiate." Ava didn't even turn her head. "You had your chance when you thought I was staff," she said. "You chose arrogance instead of decency. And now, you live with that choice." Charles tried again, desperation replacing his bravado. "Look, we didn't." "You did." Ava cut in, her tone final, absolute. "And every person here knows it." Grace's voice rose quietly from behind her camera, not directed at anyone in particular. History tends to remember who stood tall when others tried to tear them down. The quartet in the corner had stopped playing, bows hanging motionless. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath again, caught between shame and awe. Ava glanced at the shattered remains of what had been a celebration and said softly, "Now you understand what belonging looks like." And with that, she turned toward the exit, the echo of her heels the only sound in a room full of silence. The sound of Ava's heels against the marble floor echoed like a verdict being written, measured, final, impossible to ignore. The applause that had started in scattered bursts grew louder, steadier, filling the vaulted space of the Bellevue Grand until it rolled like thunder. Some guests joined in. Others simply raised their phones, recording what they already knew would be replayed across every feed by morning. Evelyn Drake, the matriarch draped in pearls, tried to regain her footing. "We can make this right," she said, her voice tight with control that was already slipping. Ava stepped closer. Her tone was calm, almost soft. "Making it right would have meant seeing me before I had to introduce myself. Treating a stranger with respect instead of suspicion. But that chance is gone." She let the words breathe, every one a clean cut. "Now all you have is the deal you lost." For a moment, no one moved. Then the young server who defended her earlier spoke up again, his voice steady this time. "You don't get to erase someone twice." The line hung in the air, solid and true. Even the security guard nodded, quietly folding his hands behind his back. Ava straightened. "This conversation is over," she said, turning toward the grand doors. "And so is your claim to my time." The room seemed to exhale as she walked away, the crowd's murmur following her like a receding tide. Evelyn and Charles Whitford stood frozen where they were, pearls and tuxedos looking more like remnants of a show that had already closed. Then came the sound of reality breaking through, the vibration of phones, sharp and insistent. Charles glanced down, his face paling. 3 missed calls from the Whitford board chair. A second later, Evelyn's clutch began to ring, her ringtone slicing through the tension like a reprimand from the world outside. She didn't answer. Across the ballroom, one of their advisors, a man in a navy suit, hurried toward the hallway, already on his phone, voice low and urgent. He didn't need to be heard. Everyone understood what was happening. Damage control had started, and it was already slipping out of their grasp. Grace Miller's camera didn't flinch. She captured it all, the shifting stances, the frantic glances at screens, the body language of people realizing too late that the balance of power had moved without them. The empire unraveling in real time. She murmured into her mic, her voice steady, professional, fascinated. Guests began drifting. Those who had been clustered around the Whitfords a few minutes ago were quietly stepping away, adjusting their jackets, finding new company near the bar or the exit. A couple by the champagne tower turned mid-conversation and made their way toward Ava's chief of staff, Rebecca Lang, whose calm expression was the only steady thing left in the room. Evelyn reached for Charles's arm. "We need to leave," she whispered, the steel finally cracking in her voice. "Not yet," Charles muttered, though his eyes betrayed panic. He scanned the crowd, but half the investors wouldn't even meet his gaze. At the far end, the string quartet began packing up their instruments, their silence more eloquent than any statement. The gala was over, not officially, but in spirit. The young server leaned toward a colleague and said quietly, "They're radioactive now. Nobody wants to be seen near them." He was right. The Whitford circle had splintered into frantic pairs, each glued to a glowing screen, their fingers flying in a blur of crisis messages. A PR consultant rushed in, tablet in hand, whispering updates that made Charles curse under his breath. Meanwhile, Rebecca Lang was shaking hands with a small group of Harlow Group executives. Their smiles were relaxed, genuine, the kind of ease that comes from knowing which side of history you're standing on. Documents exchanged hands. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Evelyn watched, her voice trembling with fury and disbelief. She's just ruined us. In front of everyone. Charles didn't reply. His attention was fixed on Grace, who still had her phone trained on them, recording every fractured expression. Somewhere nearby, a guest muttered under their breath, "They brought this on themselves." Then came the sound that sealed it, chairs scraping back as people stood, one after another, not to applaud but to leave. The exodus was quiet, deliberate. The Whitford's kingdom, built on appearances and arrogance, was emptying around them. And by the time the last of the applause faded, the only name that still carried weight in the Bellevue Grand was Ava Monroe. The downfall wasn't approaching. It had already arrived. Ava Monroe didn't rush. She didn't need to. Every step toward the doors of the Bellevue Grand was deliberate, slow enough for Evelyn Drake and Charles Whitford to feel the weight of what they'd set in motion. Rebecca Lang met her halfway across the marble floor, tablet in hand, face composed. "All Harlow contracts are signed," she said quietly. "And per your order, Whitford's team no longer has access to Brooks Global's investor platform." Ava's expression didn't flicker. "Good. Make sure every vendor in our network is notified before midnight." Rebecca's fingers moved fast across the screen. "Drafting now. Should I loop in their legal department?" "Bury them in paperwork," Ava said, the words cool and controlled. Charles, still planted where he stood, seemed to realize too late what he was hearing. His voice broke the hush. "You can't just lock us out. We have binding agreements." Ava turned slightly, just enough that her voice carried. "Agreements built on mutual respect," she said. "You broke that the moment you decided I didn't belong in my own deal." The low hum of conversation rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "She's cutting them off completely." The words spread like sparks. Rebecca's tablet chimed. "Vendor alerts sent," she confirmed. "Their credentials have been deactivated." Ava nodded. "Now send the same statement to the press. Frame it as a values decision. Make it clear we don't partner with anyone who humiliates others in public." From across the room, Grace Miller's camera caught the exact instant Rebecca hit send. It was one small gesture, but the ripple it created would stretch for years. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "This is vindictive," she snapped, her pearls trembling against her throat. Ava met her gaze evenly. "No," she said. "This is accountability. If you think this feels cruel, imagine standing here being treated like I didn't earn a seat at my own table." Evelyn opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A passing server slowed beside them, tray of champagne flutes balanced perfectly. Ava stopped him with a light touch. "I'll take one," she said, lifting the glass. "And send another to the Harlow Group table. Tell them congratulations." The young man nodded. Across the ballroom, the Harlow executives raised their own glasses in response, a silent salute to the shift in power. Rebecca leaned closer. "Do you want me to begin the review of Whitford's holdings?" "Yes," Ava said without hesitation. "Flag everything linked to our accounts, then shut it down." Charles took a step forward but froze when he realized every phone in the room was still trained on him. He swallowed whatever he meant to say. Ava set the untouched champagne back on the tray. "I don't need to toast this," she said quietly. "It's not a victory, it's a correction." With that, she turned toward the exit, leaving the Whitfords behind, locked out of more than just a contract. Then the first wave hit. Phones buzzed across the ballroom, screens lighting up in near unison. Heads bent low as notifications spread through the air like static. Grace's voice rose clearly above the murmur as she read aloud for her live stream. Brooks Global official statement. Partnership with Whitford Group terminated effective immediately, citing breach of values and public misconduct. She glanced into her lens, her voice electric. "That's confirmation, folks. This isn't speculation. It's official." Across the room, Harlow Group executives stood to shake hands with guests who had been orbiting the Whitfords only minutes earlier. The shift was unmistakable. Alliances, fortunes, reputations, all moving toward the new center of gravity. An older investor tapped his friend's arm. Pull anything tied to Whitford before Monday morning. The friend nodded, already typing on his phone. Near the edge of the room, a PR director in a navy dress whispered into her headset, voice low and clipped. Cancel tomorrow's conference. Don't reschedule. We're in containment mode. She glanced at the Whitfords, then looked away as if even standing too close might stain her reputation. The young server from before passed by Grace and murmured just loud enough for her microphone to catch it. Funny thing about power, it never really leaves the room. It just changes hands. And as Ava Monroe disappeared beyond the ballroom doors, that truth settled over the Bellevue Grand like smoke after a fire. It felt like watching a skyscraper collapse in perfect slow motion, terrifying, inevitable, impossible to look away from. Ava Monroe didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. The cameras weren't just fixed on her anymore. They were turning outward, sweeping across the ballroom to capture the aftermath. The once dominant Whitford circle had thinned to a few stunned figures. Advisors murmured urgently, slipping toward the exits, and Evelyn Drake, once the image of composed wealth, stood staring down at the marble floor as if it might open beneath her. Ava, meanwhile, was quietly conferring with Rebecca Lang near the doorway. No raised voices. No dramatics. Just crisp, decisive instructions. A few bold guests approached, business cards extended like peace offerings. Ava accepted some, declined others, but every handshake carried unspoken math. The balance of power had shifted, and she was deciding who would survive the shift. From across the room, Grace Miller tracked her through the lens, adjusting focus. Another journalist slid up beside her. She always this precise? Grace didn't look away from her screen. First time I've seen her live, she said softly. But yeah, precision's not a habit, it's her weapon. Charles Whitford's phone began to buzz again, vibrating against his palm. He ignored it, jaw tight, and shoved it into his pocket. Evelyn finally lifted her head, scanning the faces around her for sympathy. There was none. Not a single guest met her eyes. From the upper balcony, a photographer captured a wide shot. The ballroom have like a battlefield. On one side, empty tables and discarded champagne flutes. On the other, a growing cluster around Ava Monroe. It wasn't just a photo. It was history recording a power shift in real time. By the time Ava reached the exit, the Whitfords weren't simply losing face. They were vanishing. Their names were trending, yes, but for all the wrong reasons. Not for a billion-dollar triumph. For losing it live, in front of the entire industry. And that ripple? It wasn't stopping at the Bellevue Grand. It was already surging toward Wall Street. The next morning, the boardroom at Brooks Global was all glass, walnut, and quiet resolve. No chandeliers, no orchestra, no witnesses, just clarity. Ava sat at the head of the table. Rebecca Lang occupied the seat to her right, two Harlow Group executives to her left. Across from them, a screen displayed a line of red. Whitford Group stock, down 15% before noon. Jonathan Pierce, Harlow's CEO, folded his hands, the trace of a smile beneath his silver beard. You've gutted their biggest acquisition in a decade, he said. So what's next? Ava didn't hesitate. We make sure they can't rebuild using someone else's foundation. Rebecca slid a document across the table, crisp and color-coded. Here's a full breakdown of shared vendors, partner firms, and subcontractors between Brooks Global, Harlow, and Whitford. 60% already signed transition contracts with us this morning. Jonathan glanced through the list. You're going for a clean cut. I'm going for permanence, Ava replied. If they want to stay in our lane, they'll have to start from zero, and by then, their credibility will be dust. A younger Harlow executive tapped his tablet. Public sentiment's still in your favor. If we move fast, we can frame this as a new industry standard. Zero tolerance for public misconduct. Do it, Ava said. And make it loud. Anyone thinking about backing Whitford should understand exactly what that costs. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, a faint smile curving her lips. Investor Coalition just confirmed they're pulling another $200 million from Whitford's active projects. Jonathan gave a low chuckle. You've turned them into a warning label overnight. Ava's tone stayed cool. Good. People remember warnings longer than headlines. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the city through the glass walls. Then Ava spoke again, her voice calm but razor sharp. One more thing. Have legal pull every pending trademark, patent, and licensing file in Whitford's queue. If it overlaps with our strategy, we buy it before they can. If it doesn't, we tie it up until it's useless. Jonathan raised a brow. That's surgical. It's necessary, Ava said simply. They built their empire on arrogance. I'm just removing the scaffolding they leaned on. Rebecca nodded, already typing. When the meeting adjourned, the numbers were clear. Whitford Group wasn't in crisis. They were in free fall, and the person who had been underestimated, dismissed, and disrespected in front of hundreds had just rewritten the rules of the game. And this time, every camera in the country was watching her win quietly. As the Harlow team gathered their things, Jonathan paused at the door, studying Ava Monroe for a moment. You know, he said, half smiling. Most people would have called it a day after that kind of public win. Ava straightened the stack of folders in her hand, her tone even. Most people settle for applause, she replied. I don't. I settle for outcomes. With that, she turned toward her office, the skyline of downtown Chicago blazing in the evening light beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glowed gold, skyscrapers reflecting the fire of a setting sun. From the corner suite of Brooks Global, Ava stood still, her hands in her pockets. Watching the world, she'd learned to master one calculated move at a time. On her desk sat a single white envelope, the embossed seal of the Whitford Group pressed deep into the paper. Rebecca Lang had placed it there earlier, her voice low but deliberate. It's marked urgent. Ava hadn't touched it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it contained. Pleas for reconsideration, a softened apology disguised as diplomacy, maybe even a quiet offer to make things right. But that was the problem with people like Charles Whitford. They only understood power when they'd already lost it. She turned slightly, her reflection mirrored over the glittering skyline. Behind her, a muted television broadcast played footage from the Bellevue Grand Gala. Headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Ava Monroe sets a new corporate standard. $900 million collapse sends shockwaves through the market. The anchor's voice cut cleanly through the quiet. The message is unmistakable, she said. In the modern boardroom, respect is currency, and the lack of it is bankruptcy. Ava reached for her coffee, taking a slow sip. The steam curled upward like the final trace of a storm. Outside, the city pulsed, cars threading through the grid, lights flicking on across glass towers. For everyone else, it was just another evening. For the Whitfords, the world had stopped spinning. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jonathan Pierce. Vendor lockout complete. Trademark acquisition underway. They won't recover from this. Ava typed back 2 words, as planned. Then she set the phone aside and leaned back, letting the quiet return. Her eyes drifted to the skyline again, the city moving on, indifferent, efficient, alive. She thought back to the gala, the torn event badge, Evelyn Drake's brittle smile, Charles's smirk, the call to security that had started it all. She remembered the hush when she spoke, the way the room had shifted as she walked out. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration, a rebalancing. Finally, Ava reached for the envelope. She held it for a moment, feeling the embossed crest beneath her fingers, then carried it to the shredder in the corner of the room. With one steady motion, she fed it through. The blades hummed, slicing through paper and seal alike until nothing was left but a thin stream of ribbons. Rebecca Lang stepped into the office just as the shredder went quiet. Press is asking if you'll issue a statement tomorrow, she said. Ava shook her head. The statement's already been made. Outside, the last rays of sunlight hit the tallest building across the street, the one with Brooks Global etched in steel near the crown. It caught the light and burned like a beacon against the deepening blue. Ava watched it for a long moment, a faint, private smile touching her lips. It wasn't triumph she felt, it was certainty. She'd spent years fighting for a seat at the table, only to realize the truth. She didn't need an invitation. She built the table,